Okay, we're nearly ready for painting then, and so before I paint, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this plane ready as well for a display. So because we've got it in flight, we want some way of displaying it and holding it up into the air. Now you can buy the Airfix stands that you can put onto these models to have them in flight display, or you can do what I do, which is get some acrylic rods and use that to attach it to your aircraft and to a base so that it's in flight. You can either drill it up through the fuselage, or in some cases what you can do is use the acrylic rod and attach it into the afterburner at the back. And certainly with jet aircraft, this is a beautiful way of doing it, because it looks like we've got a jet stream coming out of the back of the aircraft. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go away, I'm going to cut this to size, and I'm just going to insert my rod, and I'm going to have a double stream coming out and attach it to a base. Okay, so there we have the acrylic rod coming out of the rear of the aircraft, and that will look like this when it's on a stand. Okay, and so I've used super glue just to glue those into place. Sometimes you might want to, just for display purposes, not glue them in. Okay, so painting. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and paint the Lightning, and on the back of the box it shows you the call outs of what you need to do, and also the placement of the water slide transfers, or the decals or decals, where they're supposed to go. So I'm going to have a good look at this. So the top of the aircraft is painted in 163, almost like an olive drab colour, and the bottom of the aircraft is painted with number 56. There are some other parts as well, so some of them which will be silvery, so we're going to go in, and the missiles being white. So we're going to go in and we're going to paint this. Now normally the way I would normally paint, I would use an airbrush. And so one of the first things I did when I first came back to the hobby is I soon discovered that I wanted to get myself an airbrush, and so the first one I bought was this one here, which is an Aztec, I think A370, really nice little airbrush. Then I also bought myself a Harder and Steinbeck Evolution airbrush. And I use both of them depending on what I want to do. The good thing about this one is you can change the nozzles, and this one is a traditional double action airbrush where you push down, lets the air out, and then as you pull back it lets the paint out. And this is a really nice airbrush to do some detail work with. But I use both of them, and you can change the needles depending on the thickness of your paint and so on. So the first thing I would say is, if you're thinking of taking this hobby up, then it might be worth going out and buying yourself an airbrush. You can get some cheap ones and some entry-level ones. This one costs about 120, 130 pounds. But you can get them a lot cheaper than that, and obviously then you're going to need a compressor and all the bits to go with it, but well worth it if you want to do a decent paint job. So, but I'm going to go back to the way I originally did things, and I'm going to have a go at painting it with a brush. I haven't painted a model with a brush for a very long time, so we'll go back and have a look. So here's our two main colours that we're going to be using: 56, which actually is a silver grey, and then 163, which is the green colour that's going to go on top. Now I tend to often paint the underside, the lighter colour, first on my aircraft, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint the silver underneath. Okay, so first up we're going to give this paint a really good stir. Now obviously what I want to do is I want to build it up in layers. You don't want to try to paint the whole thing in one go, and so I'm going to take some of this paint and put it into my palette. Okay, what I want to do as well, I could paint it neat, but I'm going to just try out just some different things just to thin it down. So let's try thinning it down with acetone for a minute. So I've tried thinning it down with acetone that you buy from a shop, and that just it doesn't really do a great job of doing that. So you want to thin it down, but not every thinner will work. So acetone might work with some things, but not with others. So here's what we call, this is the thinner I mainly use. It's Tamiya X20A, which is used for thinning down their paints, but it also thins down a variety of other paints as well, and a really good thinner. Again, you can get it, it's widely available at hobby stores and so on. But we'll try thinning it down with this, and I think this is sort of an alcohol-based thinner. Someone else might know a bit more than me. I often put it into a bottle like this just to make it a little bit easier, so I'm just going to put a little bit in there and then see how this thins this paint. Okay, now that thins, you can see here that one's gone all gloopy, and this one has thinned it quite nicely, so it looks like our X20A is the best way of doing it. I'm also just going to have a go at just ordinary water. As it's an acrylic, you can mix it with water and see how that goes, and that's okay as well. The problem with the water is, you know, it doesn't apply very well to your model if it's too watery, and just beads up in droplets. I'll have a go with just a touch of water in here first of all, and we'll see how it goes on. We can always rub it off if it doesn't work, so we're just going to give that a good mix. And again, the first coat, it's not really that important that it gets good coverage, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in with the paint, and I'm just going to give it stroke all the same direction. Okay, just making sure that my stroke marks are all in the same direction. I'm just going to come over the bottom of this wing. Now parts of these wings are supposed to be green on the leading edge, but I'm just going to paint the whole wing silver to begin with. Okay, and so we're just going to come over there and give that a coat. Now it's not drying too fast, so you can get sections done, so you might want to just paint it in sections to see how it gets on. So that's our first one. We're just going to streak it, so it's got a nice little streaking effect to that. So as you can see, maybe you can see that, and that could add to the weathering effect of the aircraft. So really vital. Now what we're going to do is come in and dry that. So once that's dry, we're going to come in and give it another coat. I think the important thing is you know, don't try and just coat it in one go. Like I keep saying, layers, patience, really important. You know, just a thin layer. If you build it up in thin layers, you'll get, you know, I've seen some modelers that just use a brush and they can get a just as good effect as someone using an airbrush. But it's really all about, in my experience, layers. Okay, come in with another layer. Good thing about a flat brush is you just get the paint down nice and evenly. If you are trying to use a round brush, you're not going to get the paint down very quickly, and so it's really important, you know, just go out and purchase yourself a flat brush. I think this is a 1/4 inch. Obviously the bigger the flat brush, the more paint you can get down and the better effect you can get. Now I've got a little bit of dust in this paint, so afterward, in a minute, I'm going to come in with a sander, just flatten it off and then come in again with the paint. So I'm going to mix up some more paint. I'm going to speed this little thing up and just going to keep adding layers as we go. So what I'm saying is just a drop of water, just to help it to run a little bit better. See, I'm using this sort of quick painting motion. Just try to get the streaks and just to help it to even out. So let's give that a dry. So after 3 coats, this is what we've got. Not a bad bit of colour. It's not as good, you know, it's not as good as an airbrush for me. I'm going to come in there with, I'm just going to give that a bit of a rub down and come in there with another coat. I reckon 3 or 4 coats will probably be enough. But as you can see, it's not thick, it's not too thick that we're going to get rid of this detail here. So we're just going to come in, just give a bit of a rub down. You know, what I'm trying to do is follow the where the airflow would have been, and that creates almost a weathered effect on the model, and so that's not looking too bad. I'm quite happy with that. So let's just give it another quick coat. Now I'm quite happy with that. So that's had I think 4 layers now. of the silver, and that's gone down quite nicely. I could give it another one, but I'm quite happy with that effect. I want it to have a slightly dirty effect anyway, not like a brand new aircraft, so it just looks like a toy. So I'm going to come in now, I'm going to do the rest of the silver. I'm going to speed this little video up, and I'll come back when we've done this and got the green. So off we go. The good thing about this Airfix paint is that it's not too bad for brush painting. It doesn't dry too quickly, whereas the Tamiya paints, which are designed really for an airbrush, they dry very quickly. You don't have enough time. You don't have much time to brush it in before it starts turning into a until it's drying and then turns into a powder and starts to ruin. So this stuff's quite good. It allows you, even when it's still drying, to move the paint around a bit and just sort it out without leaving a mess. It's quite not too bad. I'm quite impressed that the cheap, you know, it must be quite cheap to produce, but it does still produce quite a nice effect. Okay, so that wing has had three coats, and that's not too bad. Now, what you want to try to do, I've got some little bits of flakes of dust in here, which doesn't spoil it too much, but try to work when you're painting, try to have a good clear up before you do, and then try to work in a nice dust-free environment if possible, you know, because what's happening here is I just haven't tidied up very well, and I've got a little bit of dust into the brush, and then of course what's happened is it's got into the paint. I'm just going to give that a nice rub, try to get some of that dust off, then I'm going to give it one final coat. But even at this stage it doesn't look too bad, even just rubbed off, it actually gives it a nice sheen. Okay, it's quite important that you don't let any of the paint pool in any areas. You know, try to spread the paint out. One of the common mistakes a lot of children have is, or you know, people that aren't used to painting have, is that A, they don't hold their brush properly, B, they either put too much paint on the brush, so it pulls everywhere and becomes a mess, or they don't put enough on. So it's really important, you know, that you learn, you know, through experience, how much paint is a good amount of paint to have on your brush. Now basically, if it leaves too much behind, you've got too much, and if it's just not covering it very well at all, then you've got too little. So it's a matter of gaining experience about how much paint you need to get load onto your brush. By thinning it down with water, it becomes easier just to spread it about. Okay, so we're going to come on to the next part, and I'm painting this in sections so that I know where I've been. So now we're going to come along the side of the fuselage with the silver. Actually, even quite watered down, it does seem to adhere quite nicely. I mean, I've watered this down quite a lot, and it's going on quite nicely. And so, you know, the thinner it is, the more layers you're going to need, but the better the paint job's going to be when you're done. You know, you're going to avoid any streaking or any, you know, so any brush marks. What you want to try to do is get rid of the brush marks so it doesn't look like it's being brushed by a hand. Considering I didn't have much hope for this paint, I'm quite impressed about what it can do when you do thin it down. So let's just bring this up here, because this is an important thing to note. I don't know if you can, let me just see if I can get that to focus. Right, what you can see in here is the paint is starting to separate a little bit, you know, a little bit like when you put water on something that's very glossy, and the paint and the water just pools into droplets. It's starting to happen a little bit here, and so it's not adhering to the surface as well as you'd like. Now all I do here is periodically I just run my brush over, wait for a bit, let it dry a little bit more, and eventually it will, he says from experience, it will start to adhere a little bit better. Now obviously the second coat is always much easier to get on. Now here I've got too much paint on here, so I'm just going to take some of that paint and bring it over to this side. You know, I'm not going to dip my paint into the palette until I've spread this out nicely, and I spread it out until I can see no visible or little visible paint that's sort of building up. I like to just move it around a bit until it's just really evenly spread out. So I'm doing about half paint. It's called a 50-50 mix. I'm doing about half paint, half water, and that seems to be a really good amount of thinning for getting a really nice smooth finish on your paintwork. Now if I wasn't thinning it, what it would just be more difficult to spread this out, and you're more likely to get your brush marks left in the paintwork. Also, by painting in sections, it gives you something you can hold on to. If you try to paint the whole thing, then you get that classic thing of what do you hold while you're waiting for bits to dry. So you notice what I'm doing is I'm sort of using the brush. Sometimes I come across, but I always then, you know, come down with the brush in one general direction. And what I'm trying to do as well is, if there are any streaks, it looks like it's because the wind direction is going to be pushing all sorts of grime down the fuselage, and so it would look like some sort of weathering as well. Okay, we're almost done here. Just a few bits to touch up that I've missed out. So that's the silver work done on the bottom. I'm pretty impressed with that paintwork. Certainly better than I used to do as a child, and actually not too bad at all. You can't see many brush marks in it, and those that you can look like a natural streaking effect anyway, so I'm quite happy with that. So let's come in now and we'll have a go at doing the green. So again, we're going to give that another really good mix. Again, let's try about a 50-50 mix, so 50% paint, 50% water, just a couple of droplets. See how that mixes up. Not too bad at all. So even on the palette, you can see here where the surface water tension, or I think that's what it's called, is causing the paint not to adhere to the plastic, and that's the same sort of thing that happens on the plastic of the aircraft. So let's go for the top of this wing with the first coat. Now here you can see the classic, so you can see here where it's sort of bubbling up and not adhering as well as that silver paint did. So let's see how we can get around this. See if we just carry on with it, will it eventually just adhere? Okay, so I'm just going to keep going over it, thin it out. Yeah, and so it's starting now just to stay onto the plastic a bit better. So that's the key, is if you know, use it thin down, and if it doesn't quite stick the first time, just keep going over it, and it will start to dry. As it starts to dry, it will start to bite into the plastic a little bit more. This is why I would put a spray primer on top of this, and then it will be much easier for your paint to go down onto, because it'll have something to bite to. We're just going to go ahead and we'll see how many coats this will take. So here you can see quite a lot of streaking on the wing from the first coat. Because we've got the first coat on that acts like a primer, this one's going down much nicer. Now, unlike the silver paint, I think we're not going to get away with just 3 layers here. I think you're going to have to build up a lot more the pigment in this paint, because obviously paint is just made up of a medium that it sits in this case an acrylic medium, and some pigment. And so each paint will be, you know, each colour will be different in the way it applies and how good it is at covering up. And so some pigments are notoriously more difficult to cover up. So I find with a red or a yellow, the pigment doesn't cover as well as maybe, let's say, a black or, you know, in this case on this one, a silver. And so it will depend on the pigment that's in the paint. And so this is obviously the pigment quality in here. It means that you're going to have to do more layers. Now, obviously, with the under the wing we've got the silver, on top of the wing we've got the green, and so trying to get where the green matches the silver is really quite important. So what I tend to do is I just come down the front of that leading edge with the same sort of technique, and it creates a sort of natural line anyway. If you want to get a straight line, you could just run your finger across the front of the leading edge, but I'm quite happy with that. It's quite nice and neat and tidy. Okay, so that, I think, was that the 3rd layer? So we got not enough coverage. Okay, so, and what you'll notice, this paint has gone down quite matte. It's quite flat paint. Whereas the top layer it's got more of a sheen to it. A glossy effect, which I guess on this aircraft I think it would have had more of a satiny, more of a matte finish. So this isn't quite really the sort of the finish that I would be looking for, and so I would probably go over it with a matte varnish, or what we call a matte coat, just a clear coat, just to bring down some of that gloss. Okay, and so that was number 4, and we can still see some of the plastic coming through. It's starting to build up nicely, but we're going to need a lot more coats. But this one is certainly going down, much nicer than the one underneath, in terms of its flatness. In terms of where it's going down, the coverage, it's not covering as well as the silver paint underneath. And partly that's due as well to because the silver paint is quite close to the colour of the plastic, whereas the green is very, very different. So let's go in with I think this is coat number 5. Now it's okay to go the other way, along the edge, but then I always come back in and I just bring that paint down the airflow, one direction. Right, we're nearly there. So that, I think, was coat number 6. I think we're still going to need at least one more coat there, but I'm going to leave that to dry for a bit naturally and come back and do a final coat. So let's do 6 more coats. This is going to take a bit of time, so we'll speed up the video. Let's do 6 more coats on here, and then I'll show you what the finished product's going to be. As you can see as well, what I'm doing on the first coat, I've discovered, is if you do slightly less paint on the first coat and just come in and give it a really, really light coat, it seems to stick down better. It means that the second coat will go down much nicer as well. Okay, this is where we're coming in, and we're coming along the panel line where one colour meets another, and this is where you need to be really careful. And a good flat brush is really, you know, normally with airbrushing I'd mask that up and I'd paint it, but with a good brush you can, and a steady hand, you can get a perfect line down there between the colour demarcation. It's just worth taking a little bit of time. Okay, what I've done in this little batch here is I've mixed up some X20A, Tamiya X20A into the paint instead of water to see how that would adhere to the plastic. And as you can see, with the thinners, it doesn't pull up. It just sits nicely on the surface and covers much nicer. Okay, so if you can, you know, get hold of some X20A thinners for mixing your Airfix paint. I tried acetone, but as you can tell, it doesn't work very well. You could try just some pure alcohol that you might be able to get from a pharmacist, see if that works. But I'm going to go ahead now, and instead of using just water, I'm going to use the X20A, just because I think it will create a nicer finish than just the water. So I'll tell you what we'll do. On this side of the model, we'll do just water, and on this side we'll do the X20A, and then we'll have a look at the difference between the two. Okay, I'm just going to do another little test here. I'm going to take some cellulose thinners, which you can buy in a car store or some hobby stores or a hardware store. Cellulose thinners is often used to thin down lacquer-based paints. So we're going to try thinning our Airfix with a little bit of cellulose thinners, see what that does. Okay, and again, as you can see, as soon as that paint hits the cellulose thinners, it just turns into a gloopy mess. You do not want to be painting your model with that. Here we have it mixed with water. That's the cellulose thinners, and now we have the X20A. And so my personal choice would be to get hold of some X20A and use that to thin your paint, because I think it just covers that much nicer and actually dissolves the pigment a little bit better than just the water. definitely covers better. The paint definitely covers better using the X20A as a thinner, and probably would get away with using less layers as well. But as you can see, there's not much difference in the finish. However, if you look carefully at this, the two wings, so this one in X20A and this one with ordinary just water, there's not a great deal of difference in the finish, and in fact it's very difficult to spot a difference. The only difference is it just, with the X20A, it seems to go on that little bit smoother. However, as you can tell with here, this one has stayed wetter for longer, and this with the X20A, it dries out that little bit quicker, so you need to, you know, just keep yourself topped up and don't allow your paint to dry out in the palette. So let's just keep going. This is taking quite a while. Okay, so that's multiple coats. I've rushed this a little bit. Unfortunately, it's quite easy to get bored at this point and then ruin it. So I'm going to come in with a soft sanding stick and just, before I put the final coat on, just even this out a little bit. So we're going to come in with the final coat, give the whole thing a final coat of green. Get a little bit of you've got to be careful when you're brushing up to and fro. You get a little bit of build up along the leading and trailing edges, so it's important you just come in and get rid of those lumps and bumps, because otherwise when it dries you're going to get lumps and bumps on the edges. Okay, so that's the green done and the silver underneath. I'm going to come in and touch up some of the silver where I've gone over a little bit. The silver, in my opinion, covers much nicer and gives it a much nicer finish than the green. The green is far too glossy. Doing here is just coming in with the underside paint and just tidying up those edges, just making sure it's all nice and straight. Okay, so that's the main two colours done. What we need to do now on the box here, we've got some black to do around the cockpit. We've got some silvery parts to do in different places. And so what we're going to do now, we're going to just come in and paint those parts. Looks like I should have painted the top of this fin green. I missed that. And then once we've done those parts, we're ready to put the decals on. What we'll do here is just we're going to apply this neat, we're not going to thin this down. So this is going to be around the cockpit area and along the front here. Now here, this is so the cockpit frame needs to be painted black. Now what I would tend to normally do, I would have masked it off and sprayed it to get really nice defined lines. This is where your skill as a painter is really going to come in. And so we're going to get a detail brush and we're going to have a go at just doing the detail. I'm just going to put on my little special glasses. I'll try not to get my head in the way this time. So, always rest one little finger onto the model just so I can get as steady a brush stroke as I possibly can. I'm going to definitely have to do this in more than one layer, and it's good just to keep changing the paint that's on your brush, because acrylic dries quite quickly and as it dries it becomes more difficult to use. Now what we could do once that's dry is you can come in with a cocktail stick and just clean up where you've got it onto the glass. Okay, so there's a rather nasty looking crack in this canopy. Now Airfix have quite a good customer services department, and if you find your parts aren't up to scratch, or you've got a crack in something or something's broken, if you go onto their website, they've got a spare parts department. If you tell them exactly what happened or what you've got, they're likely to send out something in the post pretty quickly to you. And from personal experience, they've sent out things very quickly and without any charge at all. Okay, using a brush for this rather than spraying means you've got to have a very steady hand, and it's very difficult to get a really nice clean job unless you've got a really good quality paintbrush. Now this paintbrush isn't actually too bad, but I would tend to probably use something with a much finer bristle that would just lay down the paint much nicer. But actually, considering, you know, that all this stuff that comes with the kit, these brushes aren't too bad at all. Okay, so I think that's pretty much almost done. I'm going to come in now with a cocktail stick and just come round the canopy edges and just to tidy it up a bit. And what you can do with a cocktail stick, if you're trying to just scrape paint away, it's often quite handy to sometimes just cut it into a chisel shape, and that's quite useful for getting the paint off. Now effectively what you could do then is you could, you know, almost not worry about going over the lines, so you get a nice finish, and come in with a cocktail stick afterwards and just clean up all the lines that, so that you get a really nice finish to your canopy. Because it's acrylic paint, Just comes off quite easily off this canopy. And so you can get quite a nice finish, and that, you know, that's not too bad. I think what I'll do is just experiment by doing that, by just painting part of the whole cockpit and see what happens if I just paint the whole thing. So I'm just going to paint this whole thing. So what you can see here is what I've done is I've painted the whole of that front part of canopy, and I'm just going to come in with a cocktail stick and go round the rims and see how good it can be. So I'm just going to sharpen this cocktail stick up at one end, so it just creates a really nice sharp point for getting in around it. That's not a bad job, you know. If painting around the rim around the frame of the canopy daunts you, then just come in with paint the whole thing, and then come in with a cocktail stick, and it's quite easy just to clean off with a cocktail stick. A final bit of this black along the front, so the anti-glare paint that would be along the front of the fuselage here. So just come in with the last line, and just here as well. Okay. So what I'm doing here, I'm just putting the brush down and pivoting the model to make, you know, finding ways of just making the painting that little bit easier. So I'm just pivoting the model, just spinning it and letting the spin action just create that line. This paint job has taken me all morning. I can see some bits that I'm really not happy with, but I think at this point, I think we'll just leave it as it is and just get on. You know, if I was just starting out in the hobby, I'd be relatively happy with that.